Will coronavirus cause the end of neoliberalism? In answering that question, we also want to have some idea about what neoliberalism is, why it came about, and how, if at all, we can imagine it being replaced. Who would replace it, and what the potential alternatives might look like. My name is d.j.bailey. I'm a senior lecturer in politics in the Department of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Birmingham, and also currently one of the coordinators for the Critical Political Economy Research Network, CPERN. In my research and in CPERN, the aim is to consider both problems facing the current social and economic system and the ways in which that system might change, especially to think about and research the political questions of how a more stable, more sustainable, and more equal type of economy might come about. What is neoliberalism? Of course, definitions vary, but one way of thinking about neoliberalism is in terms of it being about the promotion of a myth and an attempt to extend that myth into as many areas of human life as possible. The myth is twofold. To put it simply, the myth is that humans always act in the ways that they're described in economics textbook, each individual seeking to increase their own individual utility and wealth, each individual interacting through buying and selling, demand and supply within a free market system where price is key to determining the correct level at which everyone benefits from the exchange, and in which the amount of property, wealth, and income that each person has is a fair reflection of the work, wisdom, and prior investments that they have fairly put into the economic system. The second part of this myth is that humans must act in this way because it is the only effective way to organize society and the economy. Indeed, it's portrayed as the only possible way to organize society due to our very human nature. For critics, these myths are exactly that, myths. Clearly, it is not true that humans today interact only through buying and selling on the free market. As humans, we have choices and are not determined by human nature. Indeed, key to democracy itself is the principle that we can determine how we live, not be governed by or made to act in accordance with some notion of what is natural. For this reason, many commentators believe neoliberalism is an explicitly anti-democratic economic model. Neoliberalism is characterized by a constant attempt to enforce and extend the myth of the market principles into ever greater areas of human life. The more that humans are encouraged, some might say indirectly coerced, into operating in the way described by neoliberalism's myths, the less that those myths are exposed or challenged by daily experience. There is a constant drive, therefore, to bring the neoliberal myth of the free market into different areas of human life, in part to ensure that people act in the way that neoliberalism describes. Neoliberalism both predicts that the free market principles will rule over all other principles and ensure that this is the case. To give a pertinent example, in higher education in the UK, before tuition fees were introduced, universities were run mainly as a public service that were required to teach students and ensure that relevant knowledge was taught in the public good. Now, with the introduction of tuition fees, the university has begun to operate more like a business, with students as customers, academic staff as entrepreneurs, and the universities themselves forced to compete for customers in order to generate a surplus or profit. The mythical properties of the market have been brought into a sphere of human life where they were absent before, in part creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where we must now compete for student customers because a market has been created within the university system. So I guess the question for us is, why are so many people now talking about the coronavirus crisis as potentially bringing an end to neoliberalism? The reason is that the scale of the economic role taken on by states and other political institutions in trying to stabilize the global economy is staggering. The United States federal government has adopted a $2 trillion bailout plan, whilst the Federal Reserve has announced a commitment to unlimited quantitative easing. Likewise, German Finance Minister Olaf Scholz announced a government rescue package labelled a bazooka that includes unlimited loans to German companies. Japan has announced a government economic stimulus package that totals 20% of national economic output. The EU has ended the limits that it usually places on member states' ability to spend to allow EU governments to rescue failing markets. The idea of a free market operating between individuals buying and selling has been dramatically exposed as a myth, as states step in to ensure that the entire global market economy doesn't simply collapse. These government measures are also actively reshaping the type of economy that is in place. Most of the high-income capitalist countries have adopted some kind of wage protection system in which governments subsidize employees' wages without workers even needing to work. We've seen moves to partially or fully nationalizing multiple industries in several countries, including many airlines, such as Italy's Alitalia, private hospitals in Spain, the rail network in the UK, and the adoption of a 100 billion euro fund in Germany to be used to directly buy shares in struggling German firms. Each of these measures again explicitly show the natural neoliberal free market to be a myth. Rather than private firms operating in a free market portrayed as the only effective way in which to organize the economy, seemingly overnight, struggling firms and entire sectors are now requiring the state to support or even take ownership of them in order for their very survival. In an incredibly short space of time, this kind of state capitalism that is normally associated with pariah countries such as China and Russia has gone from being vilified by much of the global political and economic elite to being widely accepted as the only means by which to ensure the survival of the global economy. Will neoliberalism now be replaced with this new state capitalism type of economy? Only time will tell. When the coronavirus crisis is over, there will likely be attempts by those attached to neoliberalism to push us back towards the mythical free market system. The question of whether those neoliberal advocates will be able to achieve their goal will largely depend on a combination of both, whether a return to neoliberalism can even be made to work, can the economy survive without massive state support, and second, the degree of opposition that they're going to face. This opposition could include both political opposition, such as we've seen recently by the now defeated politicians such as Jeremy Corbyn in the UK and Bernie Sanders in the US, and the kind of civil society opposition associated with groups such as Occupy Wall Street, the Yellow Vest movement, and Extinction Rebellion. Whether we see state capitalism, a return to neoliberal capitalism, or some more radical non-capitalist economy and society emerge over the coming years will be the key question that we face. And those of us studying critical political economy will be well placed to understand, explain, and contribute to these turbulent times.